Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. And we are in Puxatawny, Milwaukee, as we are starting tonight's episode. But I am not the host for this evening. I'm going to give this over to Miss Katie. So why don't you tell us what this movie is?
Well, hey, folks, welcome to another episode of Inside Movies Galore. I'm your host, Katie Cadaver. And tonight I'm joined by the regular crew. We have Dustin and Dane
Howdy.
and Kotobuki Jake
Hi.
and Brandon, also known as Septum Sin.
Yo.
And of
The
course
land of
you heard
contrast.
David.
The land of contrast with our intros here.
Phil?
Anyway, on tonight's episode, we're going to be discussing Harold Ramis's 1993 film Groundhog Day. And of course, as always, we talk about all the things. So this is your official spoiler warning. We don't want to spoil it for you if you haven't seen this 25-year-old movie. So this is your warning. So a brief synopsis of the film, which I believe I pulled this one off Google. So I did not write it. I don't want to take credit for it. But the synopsis is that a cynical TV weatherman, played by Bill Murray, finds himself reliving the same day over and over again when he goes on location to the small town of Punxsutawney to film a report about their annual Groundhog Day festivities. His predicament drives him to distraction until he sees a way of turning the situation to his advantage. And one thing I wanted to bring up about this movie that I think might actually be the only time this has ever happened to us on this podcast is if you look up the definition in the Urban Dictionary of Groundhog Day, like it's actually become a thing outside of the holiday of Groundhog Day. But because of this movie, the term Groundhog Day has become a way to describe like reliving the same day over and over, or doing the same thing over and over. So this movie has actually been really influential in the way we talk our urban vernacular. So I thought that was really interesting. So
That is.
anyway, yeah, we'll go around and find out what everybody thought. Dustin, why don't you go ahead? I have a feeling you're just itching to tell us about this movie.
Well, I'm always itching to talk about movies. So I first saw this movie, I think a couple years ago or so, like back when I was still living outside of Milwaukee. I saw it with my friend Andrew, who we've had on before, in case some of you listening may not know who that was. And we both were pretty impressed by it. Like it was kind of surprising that, we didn't see it until like our mid to late 20s. And this was like a huge movie for so many people for so long. So even with something being so popular, you can still miss it for a while, But I mean, I thought it was awesome. Like this might be Bill Murray's like best thing, because he does like a whole range of stuff in it. He has moments that play as horror, moments that play as comedy, moments where he's got like serious dramatic lines. Like it's such an awesome movie, like all around. Like even rewatching it, I was really impressed. I was like, geez, I didn't know he had it in him, And that was pretty much my synopsis too. Apparently, like I had TV creep Bill Murray is forced to relive the same day. Well, yeah, he was. Some of the stuff he ends up doing, which we'll touch on, he was pretty creepy.
I suppose that's fair. How about you, Dane? First time watch, rewatch?
I've seen this movie several times. Interesting tidbit. This is actually one of my dad's all-time favorite movies, because he was really obsessed with the idea of doing something over and over again until you get it right. But also, if you had no concept of time, all the things you could learn, all the books you could read, all the skills you could acquire, all that kind of stuff. So that's just a little personal background. But yeah, I've seen this movie several times, and it's just a fantastic. It gets lumped in the comedy category, and there's obviously a lot about it that is really funny. I personally would probably put it in fantasy, just because I feel like it covers a wider range of emotions, and I think that the kind of fantastical conceit is one that yields a lot of food for thought, which we'll get into in a bit.
Excellent. Jake, how about you? Was this a first-time watch or a rewatch for you?
Definitely not a first time watch. I honestly couldn't estimate how many times I've seen it. It's one of those ones, like you said, it's 25 years old. And God, that makes me feel old. Think about that. I think I saw it probably the first time not long after it came out. And I think I kind of was mildly amused, but that was about it. Like, I wasn't a huge film geek until a couple years after the film came out, if even that. Um, and I probably saw it a couple other times in part or in whole over the years. And then at some point, I cannot remember when, maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I saw a list of it was like the most underrated and most overrated screenplays of all time. And I remember this was really high on the list of most underrated screenplays. And it kind of started the process of revisiting it, and I've seen it a few times since then. And I'm still not one of the people that absolutely adores the film, but I do think it's really cool, and I do feel like it is something you pick up a little more each time you see it. Um, so it's always fun to revisit it, rewatch it. And yes, I do agree. It is one of Bill Murray's better roles.
Definitely. Brandon, what about you?
There
Okay,
we go.
Sefton, you're on.
Sorry about that. The thing didn't want to unmute. Yeah, this is actually not my first time. Surprise, surprise. I've actually seen this film. It's actually another one of those films. It seems like we seem to be tackling them. There's only a handful I've watched hundreds of times, and this is one of those. Because when I was younger, I wasn't as big into film. And there were a few films that always caught my fancy. And this one caught my fancy not long after it came out. And I watched it over and over again, wanting to get into every facet of the film. I liked it because it was that kind of film that could be what I wanted it to be for whatever occasion it was. If I wanted something lighthearted, it could be lighthearted for me. If I wanted something that was darker, it could be darker for me. So to me, it was something just really enjoyable as an overall experience.
It's definitely a versatile film. I'll agree with that. David, how about you? First time watch, rewatch?
Well, this was a rewatch. I watched it like 2 weeks ago, thinking that we were originally going to watch it. Like I don't know why, but sometimes I get our dates mixed up. But in any case, I have always enjoyed this film. I can see this film over and over, and it's like every time I see something different. And this time around, because I was looking up Chris Elliott's film credits, I actually came at it. There's a connection with him with a film called Hyperspace that evidently he got his starting in, and later on, he was involved with the Abyss and so on and so forth. And I was looking at some of the less credited people dealing with this film, and it's kind of neat and interesting. So I have always enjoyed the part where he who wouldn't want to try to make sure that we wouldn't see more than 6 weeks of winter, So,
Yeah, it's a good movie.
Not me either. Overall, yeah, we've all seen it plenty of times before. I really loved this one as a kid. And I think it was for the comedy aspect. That's really what stood out to me for a long time with this movie. I grew up on Bill Murray movies like Ghostbusters and What About Bob, Caddyshack, stuff like that. So I've always loved Bill Murray for his comedy, but it wasn't until I became an adult that I really appreciated him, for the more dramatic roles that he's played, and even the more dramatic scenes, like especially in this movie, somebody touched on it, that there's a lot. He goes through a lot in this film. It's not just comedic, which I think as an adult is really, on some of these more recent watchings for me, that's really what stood out to me, is just how he really is a broad spectrum actor, I think, and that's what I really like about him. So yeah, I watched it, just in preparation for this podcast, but it's been a few years since I saw it last. And I think it's one of those films where if I would catch it on TV or something, I could just pick up wherever it was and just watch it to the end. So definitely one of my favorites. And I actually own this one on DVD, which means I bought it a long time ago, and I actually forgot I even had it. So there was like no extras on the DVD. It was really old. Probably bought it right after it first came out, which I think was like 2008 or something.
Wow.
We can get into discussing the movie, starting with the plot. Interested to hear what you guys all thought of it. Obviously, it's a rather simple concept, but for what it was, I thought it was actually really well done, really well done story in general. So I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say on the plot.
Well, what I like about the plot is it kind of gets right away into like establishing his character. Like he's kind of like he's like a self-absorbed jerk pretty much for the beginning of the movie. And right away it establishes itself as, it's like, hey, this day is repeating, and he does, what you would expect someone like that to do. He kind of takes advantage of it. He's like, hey, we can do what we want, and he's driving around and committing petty crime. In addition to other things, it's like he's like walking up to girls. It's like, hey, what's your name? Oh, I'm, and then just like ask like basic information, and they're like, why? It's like, oh, bye. And then like the next day he's just like, oh, hey, don't I know you? You went to That's
an interesting concept, because who wouldn't want to try to who wouldn't want a day where they could just do whatever the fuck they wanted to do, and you'd still be able to come back and do it over again.
Yeah, like
he jumps in rather quickly. I think it's like the third day that he wakes up where he just starts, like, isn't that where he steals the groundhog too? Like it happens like pretty soon.
That happens later, because like the first couple days he thinks everybody's playing a trick on him, and then afterward he just kind of jumps in. It's like, yeah, we can do what we want, and he's like mouthing off to cops and driving drunk.
It's a doozy.
It's like they almost get hit by that train.
Oh yeah, then, he goes out with the drunk guys, and then he orders the flapjacks from the cop. That's right.
Yeah, that was fucking awesome. But then it kind of quickly becomes, it's like, oh, I don't know how to. After he's kind of like had his fun, like he really likes his producer, and so he tries to use the same kind of. It's like, oh, I know your interests, and say what you want to hear, and tries to like get with her like that, and it blows up in his face, and then he's just miserable the next few days. Like after a point, you see him start to despair, and it becomes a little bit of a horror movie in those sequences, because it's like, no, again.
Like, how many times have we ever wanted to smash our own alarm when we wake up? Do we ever really want to get up in the morning?
No, but I've never broken an alarm.
Same song every day for year after year after year after year.
It is a bullshit song. Like I hate that song too.
I like Cher.
I only heard it like 4 times.
Well,
that's a notable something to mention for the. That probably is a notable mention, because that actually is an integral plot point. That's how every single day he knows the day will be the same, because he hears Sonny and Cher singing to him at 6 a.m.
He wakes up alone.
Yeah.
Well, and what I always like that song, because I think that you can write it off as being kind of trite, but it is ultimately about a love that lasts against really all odds. that's kind of what he's seeking throughout the story. He's seeking something greater than his own selfish desire that can last beyond this never-ending monotony. And
I would
so,
disagree that he's seeking it throughout the entire story. I
well,
feel
not
like he
not
can actually
consciously.
come to that. I think he's very self-serving for probably
Exactly.
the first, 10,000 days that he does this for.
Well,
yeah.
It isn't until he is literally exhausted all of his narcissistic self-serving options that he starts to, develop into a deeper character where he starts to see how he can be of service to others.
Yeah, except that he also mentions his at least initial seeds of feelings, for right, retroactively he mentions his initial seeds of feelings for Rita, that were planted when he first met her, which at that time is probably nothing too deep, but it's just like, I think, and I'm saying that because I think all of us on some level seek some kind of deeper connection with people, no matter how selfish we are. But that's kind of what I think that song is intended to mean. But very quickly, the writers have said that he stays in Groundhog Day for 10 years, which I think
Oh
is really
God.
cool. Yeah,
Well,
he
yeah,
stays
there was
in that same day.
there was a few websites that I did some research. They like did the math, and when you look at everything that he did throughout the entire movie, like I guess there are 30 some days that we actually see in the film, but then when you consider like he had to learn how to play the piano and learn how to ice sculpt and like all of these other things, some people with a lot of time on their hands like figured out how long it would take them to perfect all these things, and there was answers anywhere from 8 years to like 34 years of how much time he would technically have been reliving the same day over and over again.
Well, but the thing that I think goes a long way with what you were saying about the gradual transformation of a person by pretty literally just getting worn down to the absolute breaking point. Just the fact that it is so gradual, it's not something like even in something like A Christmas Carol, which is the prototype for this kind of story. Even there, that's supposed to be over 3 nights, but then of course, when Scrooge wakes up, it's actually Christmas Day, so they kind of compress everything conveniently. But even then, that's only 3 days, whereas this is 10 years, and with a very, like, you would think kind of beyond saving kind of person. And so that's what I think is one of the most effective things, is that it does take a long time. It is not overnight whatsoever.
not to mention that we literally have the PG version. There's probably a whole lot of his character development that they left out of the film in order to keep it more lighthearted and family friendly. There was,
Yeah.
yeah. And just a real quick idea on the note, though, the idea of this is, Dustin, you said kind of the film kind of brushed horror territory.
Yeah.
Here's a crazy thought about that song. The song's called I Got You, Babe. Think about it as the day singing to him every morning. I got you, you're not getting away. And that does give it a horror vibe, doesn't it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the first characters he sees is that guy Ned. It's like, hey, I'm annoying insurance guy. And like, I think the third time that Ned showed up, I was like, is Ned the devil?
Well,
Well, he is an insurance salesman.
funny thing about that, so you have this movie, and you have something like It's a Wonderful Life. Again, both of those stories taking after the mold that A Christmas Carol formulated, but both of those, with just a little rewriting and compressing, you could easily write into Twilight Zone episodes.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. I mean, this film does take us on a journey between fantasy, comedy, you know, drama, lighthearted drama. Um, but yeah, I think with a little bit of tweaking, it could go any one of those directions for sure.
And that's probably what I like. Honestly, I think what I like most of all about the film is what I tend to like in my personal favorite movies are the ones that cover a pretty wide emotional spectrum, because I tend to dislike anything that is mostly like not dislike, but I like a little bit less things that are all one way pretty consistently at the expense of some other kind of emotion that could be here, that because life has its good times, its bad times, stuff that's funny in the midst of tragedy, or stuff that's tragic in the midst of a funny situation. I mean, that's what life is. And so I love when movies show that, and I tend to even look for the comedy in serious films, and vice versa. So, this film covers that spectrum so well.
And I really think it was needed in order to sort of make it work in general. Like, I don't think this film would have worked as well if it was just funny. Like, it would have been okay, but I don't think it would be the great film that it is, and it wouldn't have showcased Bill Murray's talents as well as it did.
It has the gravitas with which to carry a great story while having laughs and romance and bits that are depressing or scary or all those things.
I actually liked some of the psychological aspects that they bring forward. We had talked about like depth of a movie throughout this, and sometimes I don't look for the depth in a movie, especially when I was really young. I mean, when I was like in my early teens, I wasn't out looking for much depth. But as I've grown in my own career, I always like to look at a psychological angle. That's why some of my favorite movies have to do with a psychological twist of some sort. This one, for instance, though, you got to see a lot of the Kubler-Rossian stages of death and dying. Of basically, even though he wasn't dying, he did lead towards acceptance. And in a way, you could use this as a metaphor for death. And that when he finally accepted his situation, that is when he met his fulfillment. Now, and again, if you look for it deeply, you do see all of the stages, and you see it as it is meant to be presented in a psychological angle, with them not just going from one stage to the next. That's shoddy writing. Good writing actually shows how a person really does go through these. It goes to a stage, comes back, then goes forward again. Maybe even skipping a few stages as they go.
Well, in a sense, I kind of like how it goes into death about how you can get someone to fall in love with you, and just like you can get someone to fall in love with you, you can also lose that just in an instant, just by saying the wrong thing in the wrong moment. I mean, just in an instant, you say the wrong thing, and everything just kind of goes back twofold, and it's like a domino effect. Even when you have a significant other, arguments can escalate.
Well, that and also
he had to be
it just
sincere.
That, and it tells you also that human beings, like the recipe for getting someone to like you or love you or whatever, that and this is something I've struggled with a lot, because I've often wondered, like, why doesn't so and so like me? I did this and this and this. But human relationships are not like math problems. You can't just add this to this and you always get this result. Even when he tries to replicate the exact same conditions, say the exact same things, try to recreate that moment, he can't. and it just tells you that there is that inexplicable something, and that's what defines human relationships, as opposed to something like a math problem, which is it always comes out to this same result every time. Um, Interestingly enough, when we were talking about the psychological aspects, apparently this film is rather popular within some subsets of Hindus and Buddhists, because some of the ideas presented go into the idea of karma, reincarnation, and trying to move up the scale of karma in order to reach, enlightenment. And you can definitely see that. I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
Actually,
you can tell he matures a bit too.
I mean, that was that thing that I think there was a documentary that came with mine. I rewatched it because it was a really good one, and it talked about how Harold Ramis was talking about how he would get letters from not just Hindus but almost every religion. He would get letters from them saying, "This is all about us. This is all about our faith," including evangelicals or just pretty much any religion. Which is kind of it's just kind of neat that could be applied to most of those types of situations. Though, also one of the things I thought was interesting plot-wise is that the original writing of it had some very different takes, like him being there for thousands of years, or them starting the movie in the middle, where he was actually in the time warp or continuing the time warp. Imagine how different it would have been had they gone through that angle.
Well, they
That's
originally,
very
that's how it was written originally, was that the movie was just going to start right in the middle of this time loop thing, and no backstory explaining it, but then they just kept like backing it up just a little until they ended up backing it up to like the day before at the studio, so you could like really get a picture for who Phil Connors was, which I think was really
That was
necessary.
really important. Yeah.
Yeah,
To make his transformation work. And I think this is a great segue into characters if we want to just sort of slide right on into talking about
Sounds good.
Phil Connors, obviously our lead man here. And I think I'm not even sure if there's any scenes that don't have him in it. So as it was mentioned, he is definitely a very narcissistic, self-serving guy when he starts his journey here, and by the end, kind of makes a complete transformation. So, what else did you guys think about the other characters?
We only get a little bit of time with most of the other ones. I can't remember his producer's name. Like, she was the other primary character. Rita. Why can't I ever remember her stuff?
I love Andie MacDowell so much. I loved her in Sex, Lies, and Videotape, and this. She's very underrated.
I just wasn't exactly enjoying what she was wearing. I'm sorry, but the grandma sweatshirt.
Hey, it was cold out. They had to dress for the conditions.
I understand that, but it was ugly.
Well, there's no Italian fashion geniuses in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania.
How do you do this?
From personal experience, I had a fashion emergency. Okay.
Well, I think she did a really good job. Still of being kind of sexy as our sort of leading lady, even though she was under lots of sweaters and things. Like, it still translated really well, her character as being that attractive female character, even though she didn't have to show a lot of skin. It just, her charm just came out in her personality and her interactions.
Well, and that's a good point. That's what I like the most about her character and about Andie MacDowell as a person, from what I've seen in other roles. Like, she is very beautiful, but it's like she has a kind of radiance about her, and I think that is what Phil is attracted to initially, and it only becomes more evident the more that he gets to know her, that she has a genuine love for people and a kind heart and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, with certain people that you meet, that kind of just emanates from them, and it's an attractive force. And I think that she has that, that's one of the things that attracted me to my girlfriend. She has that same kind of generosity of spirit. And, I just, that's very well portrayed. And that's an attractive quality in, that a lot of, men are attracted to in women. And I'm sure vice versa. That's just a positive human trait that certain people really have in spades.
I would say, from what I've seen, this is probably one of her more charming roles that I've seen. I would say she definitely does play that very sweet, kind of good-hearted, like everything he's not at the beginning of the film. Um, and definitely, both her and Larry, the camera guy, are just kind of at the beginning. They're foils for Phil. And then by the end, they're all more kind of together. But Larry doesn't really have much personality beyond that. He's mostly used as a foil, but yeah.
I
For
do
Chris
love
Elliott,
that.
I was surprised there wasn't. He didn't have a little bit more comic relief there, because Chris Elliott's a pretty funny guy.
I do love it when they do the bachelor auction and no one wants to bid on him, which is so
Yes.
funny.
Sorry for him.
Felt kind of bad about for that guy on that, but he was being kind of like creepy, hanging on to
Yeah.
what was her name, Nancy.
Little old lady spent, what was it, a quarter?
2 bits.
Something like that, yeah.
25 cents.
Oh, for 2 bits.
2 bits.
Damn it.
What Brandon was saying earlier, which this does feed into characterization, so it's not like too off topic, but the point something that I had observed before, but I didn't really focus on it too much until the latest viewing, was the idea that so one of the things that Bill Murray comes to right before he realizes, this is an opportunity to remake myself. One of the things he ponders is am I a god? And so then he was like, well, maybe the idea of God is that he's been around for so long that he just knows everything. And I was like, isn't that an interesting idea, that, the concept of a divine being is something that has been around for so long and experiences time in a way that linear human beings don't, that, it would seem godlike to us. And so I think that's such an interesting idea, and it's really cool that Phil is going to that kind of place, despite, not really being a philosophically inclined kind of person from what we can discern. But this situation is pushing him far beyond his original capacity. And then, of course, once he actually embraces his situation, then he opens up his mind and becomes a Renaissance man, really. So, I mean, that just kind of shows that, while one may not be, godlike with one's time on Earth, one can certainly seize the day and better oneself. And Phil learns to do that. And that says a lot about him.
You know what I found interesting? I found it interesting that Larry called him prima donna twice. And that's exactly what you, Dane, called Bill Murray.
Yeah, it's that's appropriate casting, and I think that's part of why I think this story works so well, is because, and again, I think the difference between Bill Murray and like say Chevy Chase is that for every prima donna thing I've ever heard from Bill Murray, I've also heard an equal proportion of people saying that he did something really humble and cool. So it's like, it's not a perfect thing, but he also walks that line really well with his characterization here. So it's like, it couldn't be more perfect, really.
Well, they actually, Tom Hanks was considered for this role, as well as Michael Keaton. And I don't think anybody would have played it quite as well as Bill Murray did.
Not quite as well. I think both of those people had the acting chops to do it, but I do think this role serves Bill Murray's particular talents the best out of any film that I've seen of his that has comedy and drama in it. as far as pure drama, he's amazing in Lost in Translation. But like for something that has a wider emotional range, then yeah, this shows all of his talents.
Yeah, the sentiment was that Tom Hanks would have been too nice for the
Yeah.
role.
But
And I've seen him act mean at times, you know, in certain roles, but it's not quite the same thing.
this point in his career, though, he was known as a goofy, funny guy. I think this was right on the heels of A League of Their Own, so maybe, but I've seen Hanks do some really dark stuff, but at this point, yeah, I could see where Ramis might have been coming from at this point, you know, but it's an interesting thought, because I think Hanks could have done the role. It would just been a very different movie.
Well, and Michael Keaton subsequently went on to do, you know, roles that were sort of about someone in his own kind of existential anguish, you know, such as Birdman, and did well with that. Obviously, not the same conceit here, but he had the acting chops to do something like this.
Well, and I feel like Murray really brings out, I mean, he's just so good at playing that charming asshole. And that's really who Phil Connors kind of is in the start of this movie. Maybe not so much charming, but he thinks he is, you know. And I guess when they were making the film, when Bill Murray needed clarification, I mean, because imagine you're redoing the same scene over and over 1,000 times or whatever. When he needed clarification about what he needed to be doing, he would just ask, good Phil or bad Phil? And it's like, that's how he knew how to act that scene for that particular take or whatever. And I just think that's something that he does really well.
That's a good shorthand there.
I can't imagine anybody but Bill Murray actually being in this role either. Like,
neither could I.
The fact that they considered anybody else, like at any point during this, is kind of like, what?
The part that baffles me most is there were a few people that Ramis dismissed as, quote, too nice, and supposedly one of them was Chevy Chase. And I'm like, really? No. Most of the other people, I buy it, but too nice for him? No, I don't buy that.
Nah, he could only play bad Phil. I'm sorry.
Anything to say on any?
Actually, I think Chevy Chase could have done both because he's good at pretending to be a good person at times.
Well, so we're still on characters, right?
For a minute, if anybody has anything else.
There were a lot of like flavorful background characters in this who they didn't necessarily name them, but they really drove like a lot of the events that we see him like get involved with, like the kids falling out of the tree, or it's like, oh, we're getting married, but she's having second thoughts.
Yeah,
yeah, it seemed like a condition of him getting out of it was that he had to kind of sort everything out, like in the town too.
And yet there are limits to that, you know, because like what I was saying before about seizing the day and all that stuff, there are limits to that because he cannot save the old man's life. And it turns out that really it wasn't able to be saved because he was just, well, yeah, he was just old. And sometimes, you know, people's bodies just give out and there's nothing that, you know, one can really do about it, you know.
And that's the acceptance lesson for him.
Exactly.
You know, it goes over and over until he learns acceptance. And that's a big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and I couldn't find
everything.
I couldn't find a space to like say anything during when we were doing kind of the analysis of the I am God. You know, what if God was just around and got to see everything? And that was a pretty interesting concept. And so I just wanted to like voice some agreement with that.
Yeah, it's just I've never really seen a movie fully explore that. Closest I've seen is something like Interstellar, but even that's not 100% there. But you know, but again, that's just, it kind of speaks to where his character's going, and then ultimately where he ends up, which is towards that place of acceptance, because he does not, he does solve a lot of problems, but he does it out of the genuine goodness of his heart that he has developed over 10 years of being stuck in this same day. And it's not coming from a place of megalomania. It's coming from a place of genuine love for its own sake.
Yeah. So I think that probably wraps characters, huh?
Actually, what about Ned?
Oh,
Ned Ryerson?
Exactly.
Like I said earlier, I thought maybe he was the devil the first time I saw this. It made sense.
That scene they did over and over again within that same day because they need to make sure that they had everything identical. So all of those were done like one take after the other type thing. And just seeing some of the interactions were really cool. The way that both him and Bill Murray would actually interact and even ad lib. I mean, that whole line that Bill Murray did after he gave him that awkward long hug of, I don't know what you're doing tonight, but
well, that had to have been
how do we get rid of this annoying guy? Got it.
that had to have been such a weird acting situation, but from a filmmaking standpoint, that had to have been like a blessing as far as not having to like do a bunch of different setups. It's like you keep the same setup and you just kind of do it in sequence. Now, granted, you have to do the same kind of thing over and over again, so you have to keep good track of it. But relatively speaking, in terms of just pure setups, it's like, oh, look at that. That's kind of nice.
And he's a fun actor too.
On later when we get to the other production aspects on that.
Well, we can move right into that because honestly, the special effects and the music, like we can kind of group that all together. We're not talking about a horror movie that's got a ton of special effects or anything. So
right.
we can kind of jump right into production.
Oh, wow.
I wanted to mention one more thing. I wanted to mention one more thing before we completely leave characters behind. Dave was talking before about this time looking at all the different people that show up in the film. And definitely for me, I think this was the film that introduced me to Stephen Tobolowsky. He was always kind of that guy. And Chris Elliott was one of those that guy kind of actors, But I had never realized who played the married couple. And this is hilarious to me. I'm loving it. Hynden Walch and Michael Shannon were the married couple. And I'm like, that is so awesome. Michael Shannon has gone on to become a huge actor, mostly playing total scary people and douchebags, but he's had some really nice roles too. And then, of course, Walsh is a huge voice acting star. So I thought that was really awesome. I was like, huh.
I don't think I've ever heard those names before.
My kid actually knew the Hynden Walch, and I was like, what, really? She's like, oh, yeah, and she starts naming off all her credentials.
Yeah, she played Starfire in a lot of different productions. She was Harley Quinn on Arkham. She does a lot of anime overdubs. Yeah.
Wow, damn, I should have recognized the voice. Well, she didn't really have many lines, I guess. But, wow.
Right.
Real quick for effects, there were kind of two that stood out. So there's a truck explosion, which I thought was pretty great. Like, it's your standard explosion, but it was kind of nice to see something like that in this. And then when he tries to give the old man like CPR or whatever in the alleyway, like there's a slow moment. I don't know if you guys caught it too, but like as the old guy is dying, you can see like the cold breath coming from his head, like kind of dissipate. It's like at first it's like kind of like a big cloud, and then as he dies, it like disappears. And I was like, wow, that's a really good effect.
I like the effect that he did when he was up on that tall tower and he just did that somersault in the air and just kind of
that was a stunt.
That's that classic Western fall,
Or the entire Groundhog chase scene at the end with the explosion after they drive the car off of the thing. I mean, the thing's like, he could be okay. Boom.
Well, probably not now.
He's not.
I laughed so hard at that. Like, that was great.
He was still good They realized that Michael Bay sneaked onto the set.
Or like early on when he figures out what's going on, like he steals a bunch of money from the armored car when they're not looking.
You know what?
And he just like goes to a movie like in a cowboy outfit, and it's like, yeah, I can do it. Why the fuck not?
You know, I'm glad that they were playing polka music at the Groundhog's Day festival, because whenever they're singing that kind of reminds me of going to German Fest here in Milwaukee.
Oh my god, it's such an earworm, the Pennsylvania polka. No.
Actually, the movie, actually the musical choices in the movie were really good. I mean,
Oh yeah,
I mean,
everything's
the
good.
Sharon one was perfect for it. Almost like how, I mean, love it or not, 1408 did a similar thing in a way by taking a song and kind of giving it an entirely new thought and or new meaning in people's heads in some cases.
So did Fallen with that Rolling Stones song. I believe it was called "Time to Die" or something like that. But they used the song throughout the whole film with Denzel Washington. So
this is one of the arguments for use of music in film. Yeah. And talking real quick about stunts and effects and stuff, I love the whole sequence where he's letting the groundhog drive. And supposedly, I read Murray got bit nastily twice and had to have shots because of that. That's like, oh, man. But I love, my favorite part in that is like when he's don't drive angry. Don't.
That was actually improv because he didn't want the groundhog to get agitated.
Well, you know, groundhogs, they have a short temper and they're not afraid to act on it.
And
as my grandfather used to say,
Which,
my grandfather used to say about groundhogs.
well, I have a guinea pig, not a groundhog, but it's like the same kind of, you know, herbivore rodent with big square front teeth that are not meant for piercing, but they can still hurt if they decide to clamp down on you. So I have a bit of experience in that area with a similar species.
Not to mention their groundhog is a guinea pig on steroids.
Something like that.
Well, that's my grandfather used to always say about groundhogs to them. And if they get too bothersome, they're good eating.
Oh my gosh.
All you people are just worshiping this rat. I don't get it.
Well, and guinea pigs are also eaten in South America, in Peru.
They're so small, though. Like, I feel like you wouldn't get any meat off them.
You'd have to get a bunch of them and get them in a nice, you know, get some get some oil, get some spices, you know.
I bet they taste awful. Ugh.
So just think
Justin, you don't have any PETA people listening, do you?
I don't know.
Just think for a moment, though, if they had cast Chevy Chase, he could have slipped in the line. Where's Eddie? He usually eats these things.
Sure, why not?
Well, hey, why don't we just all start talking about our favorite scenes in the movie? Because that's probably going to take us a while. I'm sure we all have a lot of favorite.
Man, it's so tough to like. This movie was basically a collection of amazing scenes, so that kind of makes it hard to like narrow it down. I mean, like,
well, I have
so many good quotes. Like, you start.
My favorite all time from when I was a kid up till now is when he drops the toaster in the bathtub with like the piece of toast still in it. And he like pushes it down and drops it right in. I thought that was hilarious as a kid, especially. Like, oh, he's just giving up and trying to kill himself, and that's probably my top favorite scene.
I think for me, it might be like when he's like near his breaking point, and it's like, I know who's responsible. He has to be stopped. I know what I must do. Are you okay? And he like kidnaps the groundhog, like blows himself up. It's like, it's so grim, like all of a sudden. It's like, jeez. Is this the freaking dead zone where he's got to go shoot that guy?
There's a lot of, in that middle section, there's a lot of gallows humor, which is pretty funny.
I think that's one of the reasons why I like the part with the gopher driving so much, because it's like it is so grim, and then you cut to him in the truck with the gopher at the wheel, and it's like, what?
It's like this sort of reminded me a lot of In the Mouth of Madness, like the John Carpenter movie. It's almost like he's trapped in Hobbs End and just like everything crazy is happening. Like in some of those scenes, it's like it almost switches into like a different movie, but it still isn't like totally breaking. Like it still works as both like a comedy and a drama.
Yeah, that's an
despite,
interesting
the zaniness.
comparison. I recently just watched In the Mouth of Madness, so kind of fresh in my mind.
Did you when you saw the sign for like where the Groundhog showing or whatever it is? It's like Knobber's Knoll or something.
It's Gobbler's Knob.
Gobbler.
Like,
Yeah, and
like Sucker's Dick. What?
oh, excuse me.
Gobbler's Knob.
In the Mouth of Madness, it's Hobbs End is the town where he gets like stuck in, and so I was
Right.
like, wait a minute, do they have? Oh,
All you need is Nilbog, and you got the whole tri-county area of weirdness.
the whole cursed town motif.
Exactly. And maybe Haddonfield, Illinois. I think my favorite scene is and like you said, it's really tough. If I had to pick right off the top of my head right now, I think it would probably be towards the end when Phil shows Rita his finished ice sculpture of her face, and he's saying how I know your face so well, and I just was like, that's the culmination of everything that he's learned, the fact that he has an appreciation for people and love just in and of itself without any kind of other selfish motives, and that it's just and he's learned skills, he's learned the appreciation of beauty, and it's just like it's everything all in one little moment and in just a few words. And I'm like, that's really good writing. And I mean, I love the idea of any kind of statue or sculpture or anything like that, and so I think that sums it up very well, and it's just like the perfect thematic expression of the movie, really.
Yeah, that makes me think of so slight digression. Has anybody seen the first Futurama movie?
Oh yeah, which one was it? I've seen them all.
Bender's Big Score.
Yeah. So a big plot point is like Fry still likes Leela, but Leela's not really interested in him because he's really immature. And then she meets somebody who's like almost like the perfect like person for her. But then like stuff happens and like he dies, and then it's revealed that that guy was Fry who froze himself. He somehow went back to the past and like had his own like maturing experience, and like he grew into that person and then like froze himself again. And it sort of makes me think of that. Like it's hard not to explain without going into like a 20-minute thing because it's complicated as hell. But it makes me think like that. It's like, you know, the person you needed to be is in there. You just needed time to mature.
Yeah, to bring it out of you, like a ice sculpture where it's just a block of ice and you gradually whittle it away, and then there's the beautiful thing inside. It's like it's the old joke, you know, carving a horse out of marble, just chip away everything that's not a horse, you know.
Unless you're like SpongeBob and you just like hit the marble once and the statue like
appears, yeah,
fully formed.
And speaking of which, also if I'm kind of speaking for my dad here, because this is one of his all-time favorite movies, but like I think his favorite line in the thing was at the very end when he finally gets out of the day and he's like, you know, you told me to stay and I stayed. Yeah, I can't even make a collie stay. And it's like, stay. You know, that was always his favorite. And it is great because it's again, a culmination of everything. And it's such a genuine moment because you could really believe that real people would talk like that, which, you know, that's saying a lot because there are certain movies that try really, really hard to be realistic and they end up just not being realistic in their dialogue. But that's an example of people talking like people in an extraordinary situation.
Yeah, certainly the dialogue was quite excellent, and there were some, like you said, real simple lines like that. Like I just thought I would bring up the quotes list here at IMDb. The first line they list is a really good, simple line that sounds like something he would have said, and it's a great line. And that's well, what if there is no tomorrow? There wasn't one today. You know, that was a really good line, and I always liked that a lot. But then I just noticed I had forgotten about this line. This was maybe not the most naturalistic line, but I loved it. And that's when he's at the bed and breakfast and he's talking to that nice little old lady. And he's like, "Do you ever have deja vu, Miss Lancaster?" I don't think so, but I could check with the kitchen.
I missed that line.
Well,
Do you have
was
any
saying
other
that
favorite scenes?
I
that
did
anybody
have
else
a
wanted
couple
to
of.
share? Go ahead,
Uh,
Brandon. Go ahead.
I did have a couple of just only two major things. So I like to think of things in a comedic and a dramatic sense. To me, because that's really where the movie goes. To me, for me comedically, my favorite scene is just the montage that they do of his learning, especially when they go to the piano teacher, where he's like, "I'll give you $1,000," and just puts the little girl out of the house. And just like little moments like that were scattered throughout that like montage. I just thought that was great.
I love that too.
But I also really liked the scenes where the scene where he's trying to woo Rita the first time, and they had that magic moment, but then it shows the constant like back and forth, and he's trying to get that position. It's like, I was here, no, maybe here. This was the one that made her really like me. This showing where he was actually literally trying to struggle, or the almost fake overtones of him getting into the snow fight with the kids in that area. It's just to me that was just a lot of great acting in that scene, and a lot of good writing in there.
And like how he oh my god.
I want to mention before, actually, as far as the different elements of the film, I like those montage sequences too, and that's one thing that we haven't really mentioned that I think is critical with this one. This was an unbelievably well edited film. Like this was one where you really what they did with in the cutting room was absolutely crucial to making it work.
It also probably sucked really bad to edit this movie.
Oh yeah, like everything was essential. Like there was like nothing superfluous.
Well, and everything's the same scene, just shot like a little bit differently, you know.
I would be interested in seeing if there was actually like more cut from this film, and if they edited it back in how it would look. You know what I mean? If they had any extra footage.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard that there's any deleted scenes or extra footage, like, because there's nothing on the DVD that I have. I'm not sure what's on the Blu-ray.
Yeah, what's interesting is like I could see it either way. I could see potentially this being like a 4-hour epic, you know, with all of the all the deleted scenes being put back in, or I could see it the other way where it's just so tightly scripted that you just shoot everything you actually need and don't really waste a lot of time. And especially because this is so full of vignettes that are inherently repetitious, you know, it's like, well, they're all the same situations, but they're meant to illuminate a different aspect of this person's character arc. So I think one could easily say, okay, you know, we only need to show this much to get the point, because you could go for much longer for the sake of accuracy, but I don't think you'd gain a whole lot more insight.
Not to mention that whether good or bad, you can never have a director's cut unless one already exists. So it would kind of be an insult to Harold Ramis to recut the film, I think.
True.
Yeah, it is a shame. He was a fun director. It is sad to see him go.
Go kind of early too.
Yeah.
Did anybody else have any favorite scenes they wanted to talk about before we get into like the additional stuff?
Well, I think
some more that we haven't talked about already. What about you, Dave?
Well, my first one was what Katie had mentioned, but I guess my second one that I would tentatively enjoy is just I think the death montage was probably my favorite scenes afterwards as well. Personally, because how many? Of course, when I was a kid, I thought I saw a hell of a lot more deaths in there, but maybe I was mistaken. But I think that's why I like this, because it showed him. It's like he had his first real relationship. And then he had his first heartbreak. He had to learn how to how to love himself first, and then through the process of pain and heartbreak, find his way back to it.
Yeah,
love and
like
accept
taking care of
himself.
it's like taking care of a narwhal for 10 years. Exactly.
Yeah, well, like love and accept himself, and also accept other people as they are, accept the beauty of simple life as it is, and also that which you cannot change, no matter how good of a person you are, like the inevitable death. It's like no one can fix that.
No, I mean, you're not in control of everything. You're not in control of your destiny. You have to build it yourself.
Well, we really see him go on a journey of realizing there is more to life than just what serves him. And I think that's kind of the touching part, that it kind of shows us that there's possibly hope for people like that, because I'm sure we all know somebody who's pretty self-centered in that way.
Self-actualization, where you start with just such basic things as security. You start internally, but you must build from that place to a point of security and enlightenment at the end. Though I'm not exactly sure whether that truly fits the film, but that is how many see it.
Well, there's so many ways to interpret it, and so many religious groups have interpreted it in so many different ways. But I think it's a really great general idea that, depending on how your life experience and what you see, you can get different things out of it for sure.
Well, it also speaks to the universality of, because like you said, so many different people of different religions, or even just philosophical backgrounds or whatever. It's like it speaks to a universality within all those things, and it shows that at our core we as human beings want so many of the same things, and we are finding our ways to get there. But it's just like, it's amazing that a film can say such a profound thing to so many very different groups of people. But again, that speaks to what connects us rather than what divides us.
And speaking of dividing, one thing I wanted to bring up in terms of additional items of note, this film was actually the catalyst for the feud between Bill Murray and Harold Ramis that lasted like 21 years until Ramis was on his deathbed.
Oh, wow.
What happened? It was like, apparently Bill Murray was going through a divorce during the filming of this, and so as one might be during a divorce, he was a little bit hard to work with, and I guess at some point he had all kinds of different input about, he really wanted this to not be a comedy at all, I guess, and really to be more of a drama. And he had all these changes and ideas and things. So Ramis eventually deferred him to the writer, whose name is escaping me at the moment. But I guess Murray was really taken aback by that, and was not happy with him over that. And that's kind of what sparked their feud. And they went 20 some years without talking to each other.
Wow.
Which is really tragic. That
is pretty sad. What
especially if you see while he talked about what he said at his Oscar speech,
Yeah.
that year that he had died, it kind of reflects the emotion, probably an internalization he had on that feud.
What year is Groundhog Day from? I think that's
93.
93. Okay, yeah. So it's it's a much more recent movie.
Yeah, apparently it was Bill Murray's brother, Brian Doyle Murray, who told him, you got to go talk to Ramis. He's dying. Go see him. So he went and saw him in the hospital, and whatever was said, I mean, I guess nobody really knows, but they mended things at that point.
Kind of ironic. Very sad.
And that also explains why Ghostbusters 3 didn't happen in Harold Ramis's lifetime.
Well,
Right.
the video game happened, and that's technically what Ghostbusters 3 was supposed to be. I mean, I think we're getting like a real one now, but
I think so. But I know that
people thought he was never going to come back to it, but people have actually spotted him on the set of the filming. So apparently, that might be the case.
That'd be cool. I think with a video game like that, I mean, you don't have to be recording in the same room together. I mean, I'm sure that'd be nice for the sake of capturing the chemistry, but that's a decent workaround if things aren't exactly super cool between the stars yet,
by the way, if any of you guys can find that game, like play it. It's awesome. I'm not sure if it's backward compatible, but
earlier before the show, you mentioned a movie that was influenced by this film that you wanted to double bill with this, but we didn't have time for.
Well, I wanted to watch it like myself after. First of all, Groundhog Day ended up being substantially longer than I thought it was. Like I thought it was like an 85, 90-minute movie. It's more of like 100 and some minute movie. So I didn't have time, but so there's a Blumhouse horror movie called Happy Death Day, and it basically takes like the Groundhog Day premise into like horror. So it's like, every night, this guy murders this girl, and every morning she wakes up like reliving the same day. Like I assume trying to prevent her own murder. Like I haven't seen it, but I've been kind of interested in it for a while, and I've just never encountered it like at a decent price.
You know
I've
what
also heard it's good.
You know what we should have double billed
What was
this
that,
with?
Katie?
I said I heard it's a good movie.
Yeah, most people have said that.
You know what we should have double billed this with was Edge of Tomorrow, because that was basically sci-fi Groundhog Day.
Oh yeah, I heard about that.
Perhaps the next time we do this
movie. That was a really good movie.
Maybe we'll wake up in the morning and be like, "Hey, we can do it again."
Yeah, when we relive this day again, we'll do that.
It wouldn't be. I think like the first 2 or 3 weeks, like it'd be kind of awesome because it'd be like, "Yeah, I can do all this other stuff," but then it would be just like the worst hell.
Oh, it would get old for sure. It would get old.
It's like I read everything in the apartment. I
don't know if anybody else had any other additional items of note, but I also have in my notes here that they did a stage adaptation of this that ran on Broadway in 2016.
Yeah, didn't they do a musical?
Correct.
What haven't they done on Broadway?
That's the stage adaptation. So it never went off Broadway and toured the country. I guess it got canceled before that ever happened, but so none of us probably saw it. But I think that's interesting.
That's pretty great. Yeah. And
my biggest regret with Broadway is that we never got to see the American Psycho musical.
There's an American Psycho one and there's a Clockwork Orange one, which a couple different ones actually.
There's a Toxic Avenger one, supposedly.
I've seen that. I've seen the Toxic Avenger. It's a lot of fun. I've seen that. I've seen Evil Dead the musical twice, which is amazing, and I've seen the Rocky Horror Show, and I have not seen Little Shop of Horrors on the stage yet, but I do want to.
I'm fine with the movie. The movie is freaking spectacular.
We should probably wrap things up. We're getting up to over an hour here. So
one random thing about the film that I found kind of weird, and I was wondering, Groundhog Day. You would think they would have planned better for the release, and I wonder if they did film getting a soft reaction when it first came out. But the big premiere was February 4th, and it actually was released on February 12th. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. That's poor planning.
That sure is.
But it found its
Agreed.
audience eventually, so I guess that's what matters.
That's right.
Well, it's a little bit like the original Miracle on 34th Street being released during the summertime, even though it's a Christmas film.
Wait,
Christmas
Film too.
is Groundhog Day Saturday?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, damn.
6 more
Time
weeks.
has no meaning.
All right. Anybody else? Last thoughts?
One more thing. I remember a Supernatural episode in season 3, episode 11, that they did a Groundhog Day episode with Sam and Dean.
Oh,
So,
yeah, I think I remember that.
so I thought that that was
Yeah. This does have a lot of cultural resonance just with everything. Like Katie's talked about, like way in the beginning.
mhm.
Like it's become its own trope.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there are a bunch of other examples we could think of if we had time, but I think we got to cut it off there.
Indeed.
All right. So we'll close things out and let everybody promote themselves. Dustin, why don't you go ahead? No, Dustin promoting
Well,
himself.
hey. So,
There he is.
well, I'm Dustin. I live here in Milwaukee, and I collect anything I can find related to horror. And I've also recently started launching my own channel with actual uploads instead of just talking about it.
Hey.
I'm the Crypt of Horrors here on YouTube. I also have a Twitch where there's not anything yet, but when this is over, I'm going to attempt, most likely fail, to stream some Call of Cthulhu. So I'm also on Pop Culture Weekly with my friends that run the Twisted Dreams Horror Film Festival. And so you can hear us every Thursday at 7 o'clock Central on YouTube at Pop Culture Weekly. My own channel is The Crypt of Horrors. And I also have an Instagram for my horror collecting, DHR Hunter, which I think I might change to The Crypt of Horrors, but since I use DHR Hunter in other places, I'm still kind of deciding. You can also find me terrorizing Twitter, also at The Crypt of Horrors. We're trying a branding thing. And I'm generally pretty active there whenever I'm bored. I also have some measure of editorial power at Inside Movies Galore, although there's kind of so much going on. I don't necessarily do a whole lot there, but yeah, you can find me all over, and it'll be fun. So,
Awesome.
follow me.
All right. How about you, Dane?
I am Dane Kyle, independent filmmaker out of Charlotte, North Carolina. I've got a bunch of shorts that are included in a bunch of horror anthology feature films, including Clownsploitation, which is on Troma now, and got a bunch of others. I'm actually in the process of shooting another one for another anthology in the coming weeks. Something else I can knock out pretty quick. Trying to get my first feature film off the ground and working on a bunch of different comic books, original properties that I've got with an artist friend of mine. So I mean, the party never stops around here. It's just a matter of what's happening when.
Excellent. And why don't you go ahead, Jake?
Hi, I am Jake. I'm here in Central Virginia, and I frequently guest on the channel Septum Sin vs. World on YouTube. And we, this week, did a top 15 list that's going to be a lot of fun. That's the top 15 people who are dramatically overdue for at least one Oscar nomination. And we'll follow that up in a couple weeks with people who've been nominated but really need a win. And I've put together I've filmed a very long, well, I don't want to say very long, but a fun video. Weird basically a video of the movies I have watched this year with what I think should be their awards consideration. I plan to get that edited and posted soon. And I join in on the general videos that we do as well, and I'll let Brandon talk more on those in a minute. And I have my own channel called Kabuki Jake, also on YouTube. And the Hub Pages page, neither of those are heavily edited, but every once in a while something will be added. And there you go.
Awesome. Why don't you go ahead, Brandon?
There we go.
you.
Well, I am with Septum Sun versus the World. I actually run the channel, and we are a channel dedicated to physical media and the love of all things physical media. But mostly movies. We do various things such as news videos where we let you know what's coming out on Blu-ray and DVD or 4K, whatever your pleasure is. And of course, we do pickup videos. Most recently, we do have a top 15 coming out this Friday. I have it edited. I just want to throw a good title on it, and my mind has lost the title, but we'll figure that out tomorrow. And that will be up as well. So we do like to do various things, and I do partner occasionally with Inside Movies Galore to do reviews. And we did Kagemusha not too long ago with myself, Kotobuki Jake, and Dave, talking about that film. And we hope to do one in the near future, hopefully, about the mermaids Scar and Mermaid Forest, I believe.
Cool. Sounds like fun. Why don't you go ahead, David?
Alrighty. My name is David Strigg. I am the normal host of Inside Movies Galore, but as we have said before, we are all hosts. So,
Yes.
welcome everyone, and thank you for enjoying the episode. Hopefully, we won't be reliving this episode tomorrow.
Well, we had a good time anyway, though, right?
But I also do reviews and of physical media as well as reviews of films that haven't been released on physical media on the channel as well. So definitely check that out. I actually recently watched a film that dealt with a director that had brought out Chris Elliott, who was actually in this film recently, called Wolfman from 1979. So definitely check out that review. I had some fun with that. And also check out the Kagemusha episode that I did with Septum Sim and Kabuki Jake. That was definitely fun. I'll definitely be slowly but surely getting some more reviews out. I definitely have a lot more in store. I'm kind of behind. I may be the slowest person, but I definitely am on top of things. So
Cool. Well, and as always, I'm Katie Cadaver from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I'm a body positive horror artist and alternative model. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Patreon, Twitter, also here on YouTube. And I'm also the makeup artist for the horror punk band Ratbat Spider. You can listen to them at ratbatspider.bandcamp.com. And I am also a dead girl for Dead Girls Dark Coffin Classics, and you can watch episodes at vimeo.com/ddcc. I also perform and produce for Grindhouse Tees Burlesque Productions, and you can find us on Facebook. I also am a Tromat with Trauma Entertainment, and you can find all your trauma goodies at trauma.com. And I'm going to be soon guesting on another podcast called The Shameless Picture Show. Some of you folks might remember Michael Vyers, who runs that podcast. He was a guest here on our podcast, oh boy, quite a while ago. I don't even remember what episode it was, but he has asked me to join him and do an episode. I think we're going to be covering the Blues Brothers on the Shameless Picture Show. So I'm looking forward to that. And you can listen to the Shameless Picture Show wherever you get your podcasts from. Apple Podcasts, Spotify. They're now on Spotify. Yay. And also, I'm an editor here at Inside Movies Galore. And next week, we're going to be covering the film Legend. So definitely Yes, definitely stay tuned for that one.
And
as
going to be hosting that one.
Oh,
Yes.
right, I am.
Yes, so better get your notes printed up. But as always, please remember to like us on Facebook, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and share us with your friends.
Yeah, I love that movie, so it'll be great. So yeah, like, share, and subscribe to all our stuff. Follow us across different dimensions.
Which is interesting because I was just watching a movie that was done in the style of Tales from the Crypt, called Tales from the Third Dimension or something like that.
Are we still on?
In any case,
we now return you to whatever it was you were doing.
Like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.